This is Letter from America. Today's topic is Zimbabwe's economy is going to the grave. Corruption is costing Zimbabwe $3 billion a year, according to an economics professor. The prophetic message about Zimbabwe in Thomas Mapfumo's song Nyika iyi yamaida yawe mamvemve, or the country you so loved is now in ruins, has come to pass, has become a reality in today's Zimbabwe. 70% of the Zimbabwean population lives in poverty today. A renowned economics professor has said the state of the Zimbabwean economy is in dire straits. Zimbabwe's economy is going to the grave, fueled by corruption that is costing Zimbabwe more than $3 billion a year. Economics professor Gift Mugano said the irony of the Zimbabwe's economic decline is that the Minister of Finance, Mthuli Ncube, has a widely publicized international reputation in economics. Yet he is prescribing the wrong solution to the Zimbabwean economic problems. Professor Mugano said when Minister Ncube was appointed Minister of Finance in 2018, 29% of Zimbabweans lived in extreme poverty. Today, in 2022, 49% or nearly half the Zimbabwean population now lives in extreme poverty. Mugano said if Minister Ncube was a medical doctor, half the Zimbabwean population would have literally died. Why? Because Minister Ncube has not diagnosed the root problem of the Zimbabwean economy. Speaking during an interview with an online publication, Professor Mugano described the state of the economy during the 6 months of 2022 as chaotic and toxic. Inflation was 60% at the beginning of the year, but is now about 200%. Projections are it will rise to 400% by the middle of the year. The results of this spiraling inflation is workers are suffering erosion of wages, and the Zimbabwean dollar is now meaningless, said Professor Mugano. The exchange rate at the beginning of this year was 120 Zimbabwean dollars to $1. But today, 375 Zimbabwean dollars are equal to $1. This is about 3 times higher than at the beginning of this year. Professor Mugano said Zimbabwe under Minister Ncube has resulted in the decay in social services like health and education. Hospitals have no medicines and no supporting infrastructure. Women coming to give birth are required to buy items required for their treatment, items that hospitals are supposed to supply the patients. Mugano said Minister Ncube conflicting policy statements are like adding poison to a sick person. There's no clarity of policy, and Minister Ncube is creating a state of uncertainty. Lawlessness is now rampant in Zimbabwe due to lack of policy direction or clarity, Mugano said. He added that Mnangagwa himself recognizes there is a crisis in the country. But Mnangagwa always promises new measures, yet nothing happens at all. Workers earning in Zimbabwe dollars have to buy in US dollars in the shops. Zimbabwean diplomats have gone for 6 months or more without pay, Professor Mugano said. 49% of the Zimbabwean population, or 7.9 million, now lives in extreme poverty. People in extreme poverty can be a serious security threat, he said. Because of financial constraints, many kids are not going to school. Free education was promised in 2018. Nothing has happened. Finance Minister Ncube must accept that things are not working. Instead of just saying, Zvakarongeka, everything is under control. That's what Minister Ncube always says. When he is asked about these problems, he just said, don't you worry, Zvakarongeka. Minister Ncube's measures are not working, said Professor Mugano. The minister is using a policy of experimentation without diagnosis. If Minister Ncube was a medical doctor, half the Zimbabweans would have literally died by now, Professor Mugano said. Another of Minister Ncube's prescription to address the economy is the introduction of gold coins as a measure of value. Professor Mugano said gold coins work in formal markets. They are like stock in investments. But to invest, you must have a surplus. You must have savings. 49% of Zimbabweans live in extreme poverty at less than $1.9 a day. And 70% of Zimbabweans live in poverty, or at less than $2.8 a day. 70% of Zimbabweans cannot afford to buy gold coins at 1.8 thousand US dollars per ounce, he said. Gold coins do not bring convenience to 80% of the Zimbabwean population, who must spend the little they earn on a daily basis. Gold coins as an investment are kept as an investment in the Treasury Department. Professor Mugano said dollarizing the Zimbabwean economy is harmful to the economy. But at the same time, dollarizing is the best way forward as a temporary measure to create an investment environment that will stabilize the Zimbabwean dollar. In neighboring Zambia, such investment climate has resulted in the Zambian kwacha now being stronger than the South African rand, he said. Some of the measures to establish the enabling environment for a stable Zimbabwean dollar will require addressing corruption. Zimbabwe is losing $3 billion US every year because of corruption. Mugano said Minister Ncube was like a doctor supposedly trying through experimentation to treat a patient who is in the intensive care unit. But this doctor has run out of ideas about how to treat the patient. The best way forward is for political leaders to have an all stakeholders meeting to address the economy. Professor Mugano said Pollard is a step in the right direction, but it is not complete without the participation of CCC. He said Pollard is in fact one party, that is ZANU-PF. All other participants in Pollard have no legitimacy to represent Zimbabweans. They were voted in by less than 2% of the voters. They should be sitting in the terraces, said Professor Mugano. In the case of CCC, Chamisa and Mnangagwa, each won almost half the votes that were cast. Mnangagwa must swallow his pride, pick up the phone, and call Chamisa for serious talks. Professor Mugano said without the CCC participation, the Zimbabwean economy is going to the grave. Two big events that have attracted international attention have a warning message from Mnangagwa, ZANU-PF, and the Dizzy Pachinoi gang. Both events are of particular interest to Zimbabwe. And these carry an ominous warning to the Dizzy Pachinoi fascists in Harare. The message from one of these events is very similar to what the biblical King Belshazzar, the son of Nebuchadnezzar, saw on the wall as he was feasting with his friends and prostitutes. The message is recorded in Daniel 5, verse 25, mysteriously appeared on the wall, and it simply read, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The meaning of that writing was, your days are numbered. And a few days, the king Belshazzar died. Many Zimbabweans are fascinated by protests in Sri Lanka that resulted in thousands of ordinary civilians storming the State House and forcing both the Prime Minister and President out of office. The videos of the triumphant protesters ransacking the State House went viral on the social media. Zimbabweans are discussing among themselves, if it can happen in Sri Lanka, why can't it happen in Zimbabwe? But most important, the Sri Lanka protests have become an inspiration to Zimbabweans to do likewise. The ominous winds of change are blowing in Zimbabwe today, and just as the former British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan said in 1960 when he addressed the parliament in apartheid South Africa, nothing can stop the winds of change. The Boers who ruled apartheid South Africa laughed at the prospect of that South Africa could be ruled by blacks. It happened 34 years later when Nelson Mandela in 1994 became the first black president of an independent South Africa. In the then Rhodesia, former Prime Minister Ian Smith said on March 2, 1970, that he did not believe in black majority rule in Rhodesia. Not even for 1,000 years, he added. But 10 years later, in 1980, the new nation of Zimbabwe emerged to replace Rhodesia. Zimbabwe was under black majority rule, marking the end of 100 years of secular colonial rule. In Malawi, Dr. Kamuzu declared himself president for life in 1971. He declared no one could be president of Malawi besides him. As a matter of fact, he did not even have a vice president. He did not want a vice president because he believed he would rule Malawi forever. But not so, because 23 years later, he was removed from power in 1994. And when he died in 1996, Kamuzu was no longer president of Malawi. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe once declared in 2008 that only God and the ancestral spirits could remove him from power. That was the same year Mugabe and ZANU lost both presidential and parliamentary elections to MDCT led by the late Tsvangirai. Mugabe was, however, removed from office by the army and replaced with Mnangagwa in 2017. Recently, in Zimbabwe, just a few days ago, as a matter of fact, Mnangagwa declared that a person walking on foot from Zimbabwe to China would get there sooner than Triple C could reach the State House in Harare. By the way, China is 9,957 kilometers or 6,187 miles from Zimbabwe. But hey, no need to calculate how long it will take to walk from Zimbabwe to China, because no sane person would think about it. But the emergence of Triple C under Chamisa, especially its phenomenal landslide victories in the last two by-elections, has sent Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF in a panic mode. ZANU-PF always boasts that the securocrats are on the ruling party's side. This claim was made by ZANU-PF spokesperson Chris Mutsvangwa this week. But Mutsvangwa did not receive a resounding vote of support from the army spokesperson, who merely said that the army does not comment on political issues. In the past, army chiefs have declared in public their support for ZANU-PF by stating they would not salute a president who did not serve the War of Liberation. Even the war veterans have been lukewarm these days towards ZANU-PF. The reasons are obvious. Chris Mutsvangwa just returned from a luxurious and expensive holiday from Europe and the United States. The same countries he and his dizzy Ripachinoi outfit have been scandalizing for what they falsely say sanctions against Zimbabwe. They even have anti an anti-sanctions day in which they have roped in the reluctant SADC countries. It turns out that the same United States that Mutsvangwa and his gang scandalizes every day is not just an appetizing destination for Mutsvangwa and his family to visit. The US has provided millions of United States dollars in humanitarian aid to Zimbabwe. According to the US State Department report, in 2021, the United States provided over $317 million in bilateral assistance to support democracy and governance, agriculture, and health programming. In addition, the United States has provided $51 million in humanitarian assistance to Zimbabwe. Since 2002, the United States Agency for International Development Assistance has supported the people of Zimbabwe to strengthen health services, increase food security, support economic growth, and promote democratic governance. Notwithstanding the ongoing anti-democratic and repressive practices by government of Zimbabwe, which continue to affect the bilateral relationship, the United States remains the largest provider of health and humanitarian assistance, including through the United States President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief, food assistance, and disaster relief to the people of Zimbabwe. So much for the United States, the country that Mutsvangwa and his Dizzy Pachinoi outfit are scandalizing for what they call sanctions against Zimbabwe. Chris Mutsvangwa and his fascist Dizzy Pachinoi gang know very well that the cause of the economic mess in Zimbabwe is in today is largely because of poor leadership and corruption. Mutsvangwa himself once asked publicly, where is the $15 billion that cannot be accounted for? He was later chastised by his fellow corrupt colleagues, and the following day, he claimed he had been quoted out of context. Somebody should have reminded him that there is a video recording of him on the internet asking about the missing $15 billion. It is reported that every month, more than $100 million goes missing because of corruption in Zimbabwe. That amounts to more than $1 billion or $3 billion a year that goes missing, and all that because of corruption. If all the billions of dollars that are stolen from Zimbabwe were recovered, Zimbabwe would have a first-class infrastructure, new schools, well-equipped hospitals, well-maintained roads, and social services. So where do we go from here? Where do Zimbabweans go from here? Well, there are three scenarios on how Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF could lose power and be forced to step down. Some of these scenarios are possible, but not probable. The first scenario would be Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF being defeated at the next US general elections. All projections, including those by ZANU-PF, point to a landslide victory for CCC in both presidential and parliamentary elections. The explanation for these projections is very simple. Zimbabweans are totally fed up with ZANU-PF's failure to deliver the democratic ideals that were promised at independence in 1980. Zimbabweans are now acutely aware that ZANU-PF, after misruling the country for 42 years, has not improved the lives of Zimbabweans in any meaningful way. Professor Mugano gave startling figures about how Zimbabweans are sinking even deeper into poverty. In 2017, when Mnangagwa took over from Mugabe as president, 29% of the Zimbabweans lived under extreme poverty. Today, 5 years later, 49%, or almost half, of Zimbabweans now live under extreme poverty. This is half the total population of the country. In the past 5 years under Mnangagwa's presidency, inflation, the cost of living have all skyrocketed. And the Zimbabwean dollar is now in a coma. One of the school teachers who are on strike said the announcement by government that the teachers' salaries would be increased by 100% was meaningless. It was a laughable joke. What the government was increasing by 100% are the salaries in Zimbabwean dollars. This teacher said teachers today earn an equivalent of about $50 per month. The proposed increase in Zim dollars would double the salaries. But the Zimbabwean dollar is losing its value every day. So what the teacher will end up receiving will be an equivalent of $29, down from $50. And this suffering, this pain is being felt across the entire nation. And for this reason, Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF know they will lose the 2023 general elections. But as in 2008 elections, Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF will not step down. They will use the securocrats, the army and the police, and politically motivated violence and rigging of the elections to stay in power. The second scenario that would remove Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF from power would be a mass sustained demonstration. The Sri Lanka experience, where mass protests have been effective in removing the president from power, has been an inspiring news for Zimbabwe. It is reported in London that the Zimbabwean diaspora met with their Sri Lankan counterparts. Undoubtedly, the Zimbabweans learned a lot about how the mass demonstrations were planned and put into action. One thing Zimbabweans learned from the Sri Lanka experience was no amount of military force can stand in the way of a determined people. This has been shown in the past. The Arab Spring, the Sudanese mass protests, they are all examples where a determined people managed to force changes in the way they were governed. Such a sustained mass protest is possible in Zimbabwe, but unfortunately, it is not probable because Zimbabweans live under the iron grip of fear. Fear of the army, fear of the police, fear of the ZANU-PF thugs. ZANU-PF has perfected its use of the captured state institutions, intimidation, and politically motivated violence that they feel confident that no mass protest will happen in Zimbabwe. The third scenario that would bring Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF from power could be a combination of factors. The first would be an internal split within ZANU-PF. There are reports that cracks are appearing within ZANU-PF. This is not new. ZANU-PF has traditionally been said to have two key factions. One moderate and led by Joyce Mujuru. The other was the hardline lacrosse faction led by Mnangagwa. A third and possibly much smaller and weaker faction called the G40 emerged. The departure of Mujuru left the Mnangagwa faction the dominant formation. The other factor would be the emergence of a third force, made up mostly of youths, some war veterans, and disgruntled members of ZANU-PF. All of them feel they have not had a fair share of the loot from corruption. They also belong to the 70% of Zimbabweans who live in either extreme poverty or just poverty. The third factor could be the growing reluctance from the securocrats, army and police and CIO, to engage in politically motivated violence against CCC supporters. Members of the army, police and CIO have conveyed their support for Chamisa as a matter of fact and the CCC. It is likely that at any election, they will not be willing to be used as errand boys to do the dirty work for ZANU-PF. The ritual killing of Mo Blessing Ali, the jailing of Job Sikala and Godfrey Sitole on trumped-up charges, and the ongoing harassment, intimidation, and abductions of CCC supporters has touched the conscience of the nation. And the police and soldiers are aware that the eyes of the nation, and indeed the world, are fixed squarely on them. It was revealed that ZANU-PF is increasingly aware that the police and army are now reluctant to serve the interests of ZANU-PF at the expense of their obligation to protect citizens without regard to politics. For this reason, ZANU-PF has a stockpile of police and army uniforms at its headquarters. ZANU-PF can now hire some of their thugs, dress them in police and army uniforms, and send them to terrorize citizens. The next factor is Zimbabwe is a youthful population. More than 70% of Zimbabweans were born after independence. They do not resonate with the liberation struggle narratives and propaganda by ZANU-PF. They are unemployed. Their immediate concerns are not the liberation struggle that occurred more than 42 years ago. Their immediate concerns are they are unemployed, and some of them live in extreme poverty. They do not see any benefits in serving the interests of ZANU-PF because ZANU-PF has done nothing for Zimbabweans in the 42 years it has been in power. There is no telling when and how Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF will leave or be forced to leave government. The fact of the matter is there is a new generation of Zimbabweans who are willing to overcome the fear factor and confront the Desiree Bachinoi dictators who have oppressed them for 42 years. And the emerging mantra against the oppressors is an old clarion call. Enough is enough. Zvakwana sokwanele. This operation might Hlome, or simply let the struggle begin, may well be the battle cry for the liberation of Zimbabwe.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe.